My name is Kennedy Reynolds. For 34 years, I was the family failure. The one everyone whispered about at weddings. The name dropped only when people asked whatever happened to her. Tonight, I'm sitting at a gala hosted by Governor Blackwell, alone at a back table in a simple black dress, watching my golden boy brother Ryan charm the room. He's everything the Reynolds name stands for. Ivy League educated, rich, polished, and perfectly aligned with my parents' dreams. I was the mistake, the black sheep, until the governor spotted me and froze. "Wait, you're Senator Reynolds?" he asked, stunned. Across the room, Ryan's face drained of color. In one moment, years of being dismissed collapsed under the weight of a truth none of them saw coming. But let's go back to where it all began. Being a Reynolds in Boston meant something. Our name was on university buildings, charity donor lists, and society pages. We were expected to follow a script: prep school, Ivy League, high-paying career in law or finance, and a spouse who looked good in pearls or a tailored suit. My brother Ryan fit the mold effortlessly. He was born to please. Handsome, athletic, charming. When he aced his exams, my father beamed. When he became captain of the lacrosse team, my mother threw a party. He was everything they dreamed of. And I was the cautionary tale. I wasn't rebellious, just curious. While Ryan worked the country club, I read about civil rights, studied government, and asked uncomfortable questions. Questions like, why does our money come from companies harming the planet? That was the beginning of the end for me. In high school, I chose a controversial topic for an assignment, a policy that directly challenged our family's financial interests. I got an A. My parents got furious. "Do you have any idea how this makes us look?" my father raged. That was my first real taste of what it meant to step off the script. And from that day forward, I never looked back, even though it cost me everything. After high school, I turned down Brown University, the Reynolds Legacy School, and instead accepted a full ride at a gritty public university in upstate New York. My mother looked at me like I'd slapped her across the face. "You're throwing your life away," she said, barely holding back tears. But I wasn't throwing anything away. I was finally picking something up. Myself. At SUNY, I studied public policy and threw myself into grassroots organizing. I didn't join sororities or plan luxury internships. I spent my nights tutoring in underfunded schools and canvassing neighborhoods forgotten by politicians. While my classmates posted pictures from Europe, I was learning how to listen to people who'd been silenced their whole lives. That's where I met Councilwoman Denise Mallory, a firebrand who took me under her wing. She taught me how to build coalitions, fight quietly in committee rooms, and rage when necessary in town halls. She didn't wear pearls or speak softly, and she changed lives every single day. Back home, Ryan was rising. Ivy League grad, corporate law, six-figure salary before age 30. My parents sent Christmas letters listing every one of his accomplishments. When it came to me, it was always vague. Kennedy is still doing her nonprofit work. I started getting left out of family photos. Not officially, but always somehow on the edge. As if I didn't quite belong. As if they didn't know how to fit me into the narrative anymore. I didn't care. Not really. Because while Ryan built bank accounts and board memberships, I was helping build playgrounds, fund school lunches, and pass ordinances that made life a little easier for real people. I wasn't the Reynolds they celebrated, but I was becoming someone worth remembering. When I decided to run for state senate, no one took me seriously. Not the party insiders, not the donors, and definitely not my family. "Kennedy," my mother sighed, "politics is not for people like you. It's brutal, it's expensive, it's televised." My father chuckled when I told him. "Do you even have a platform? A base? What are you running on? Feelings?" I wanted to scream, but instead, I smiled. Because I did have a platform. I had 10 years of community organizing under my belt. I had real people backing me. Nurses, teachers, single moms, veterans. People who had been ignored and shut out by the same polished elites my parents adored. I wasn't running on photo ops or family money. I was running on policy and lived experience. And I knew what I was talking about. We started with almost nothing. My campaign office was a shared co-working space. My volunteers were local teens and retired activists. My website crashed twice during launch. But when we knocked doors, people listened. "Wait, you actually live here?" they'd ask, surprised. Yes, I lived there. I worked there. I bought groceries from the same store they did. I stood in the same DMV lines. I paid rent just like they did. I ran a campaign that wasn't about me. It was about us, the forgotten, the underestimated, the ones everyone dismissed. And slowly, the tide began to shift. Donations trickled in. Newspaper articles started using the word underdog. Local debates went viral online. My opponent, a 3-term incumbent backed by big developers, suddenly looked rattled. And my family? They stopped returning my calls. Until the night I won the primary. The night I won the primary, we gathered in that cramped co-working space with a broken coffee machine and folding chairs borrowed from the community center. The moment the results came in, the room exploded. People were crying, hugging, chanting my name like we were at a rock concert. And me? I stood frozen, staring at the screen. I had beaten a 3-term incumbent by 1.4%. It didn't feel real. Someone handed me a mic. My campaign manager nudged me forward. I looked around at the faces, some young, some weathered, some barely holding on. And I knew why I was there. I didn't win this alone. We won this together. "We're just getting started," I said, voice shaking. They told us we didn't belong. They told us we couldn't win. But here we are, and we're not done. That speech, unplanned, raw, was picked up by local news, then by national blogs. By morning, a clip had over 500,000 views. They called me the neighborhood senator, the people's candidate. I didn't care about the titles. I cared about what came next. That night, after the celebration, I went home. My phone buzzed non-stop. Reporters, volunteers, old friends, but not a single message from my family until 2:12 a.m. It was from my brother. "Congrats. You got lucky. Just don't embarrass the family when you lose in November." That was it. No call, no pride, just one more attempt to remind me I didn't belong. But this time, it didn't hurt. Because for once, I didn't care what they thought. I had built something without their help, without their name, without their money. And come November, I wasn't planning on losing. Winning the primary wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Suddenly, I wasn't just the underdog. I was a threat. And the machine noticed. Within a week, attack ads started showing up on local TV. Slick, glossy videos labeling me too radical, too inexperienced, not one of us. They twisted my past, took my years of nonprofit work, and made them sound like fringe activism. They made it seem like I hated my own country because I once criticized tax loopholes. And it didn't stop there. They dug through my college speeches, old social media posts. One grainy photo of me protesting outside a pharmaceutical firm made headlines. "Senate candidate has history of anti-business rhetoric," the headline read. Then came the whispers. "She's not married, no kids. What does she know about family values? She didn't even go to an Ivy. She's trying to play politics, but she's just an angry woman with something to prove." The worst part? Some of those voices came from people I grew up with. Neighbors, old classmates, even extended family who had once said they were proud of me. And my parents? Still silent. No call, no message. Nothing but a forwarded statement from my father's assistant. "We wish Kennedy the best in her personal pursuits, but these views do not represent the Reynolds family." It stung. But I'd been through worse, so I got back on the ground. Knocked more doors, held town halls, answered every attack with facts, honesty, and heart. Because I wasn't running to be liked by elites. I was running to be a voice for the people they ignored. And the people? They saw through the noise. Polls started to shift. Slowly. Steadily. The gap narrowed. We were making history. Whether they liked it or not. Election day. I barely slept the night before. My campaign manager said we had a shot. A real one. The final polls showed us neck and neck. But I knew better than to trust numbers. Numbers couldn't measure fear, or smear tactics, or the quiet pressure of political dynasties whispering behind closed doors. I put on a simple navy blazer, the same one I wore to my first town hall, and made my way to headquarters. Volunteers buzzed like bees. Phones rang non-stop. Teenagers passed out flyers on corners. Retirees baked cookies for poll workers. There was a fire in the air, hope, crackling at the edges. I spent the morning greeting voters, shaking hands, hugging people I'd fought for when no one else would. And then, around noon, someone said, "You have a visitor." I turned, and there he was. My brother. Ryan. Same perfect hair, same expensive shoes, same unreadable expression. "I wanted to see it for myself," he said. I waited for the jab, the sarcasm, the speech about family image. Instead, he looked around at the crowd, the signs, the people, and then back at me. "I underestimated you," he said quietly. "We all did." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. He wasn't there to endorse me or apologize. He was there because the old world, the world of polished smiles and curated resumes, had started to crack. And he knew it. When he left, I turned back to my team. No matter what happened that night, I had already won. Because I had done what no one thought possible. Not just proved them wrong, but proved myself right. That night we gathered in a rented high school gym. No chandeliers, no champagne, just folding chairs, pizza boxes, and hundreds of people holding their breath. And at 11:46 p.m., the results came in. I had won. By 3.2%, the room erupted. People cried, danced, collapsed into each other's arms. Me? I smiled, lifted the mic, and said, "This seat isn't mine. It's ours. Now let's get to work." Winning the election was one thing. Walking into the state Senate chamber on my first day, that was something else. The building smelled like polished wood and old money. Staffers in tailored suits, reporters with cameras, security whispering into earpieces. Everyone looked like they'd been born into politics. I wore a blazer I bought secondhand, held my grandmother's cross in my pocket, and reminded myself, "You belong here because you're—" But I wasn't prepared for how hard it would be. The system didn't want me to suck. Seasoned legislators rolled their eyes when I spoke. They called me idealistic, too emotional, naive. One senator told me, with a patronizing smile, "You are here to learn, not—" They didn't see the woman who spent a decade in the trenches. They saw the girl who didn't go to Harvard, who didn't have a family name tied to oil or banking. They underestimated. But I didn't come to be lie. I drafted my first bill in the first month. It was modest. A pilot program to increase after-school funding in underserved districts. I had the numbers, the need. It got buried in. That's how they do it. They don't kill ideas out loud. They suffocate them quietly in procedure. ND. Still, I showed up. Every day. I sat through hearings. I listened to opposing voices without flinching. I negotiated. I stood my grew. And slowly not because I shouted, but because I outlasted them. I outworked them. And when I finally stood to speak on the floor, not as a protester, not as a volunteer, but as a senator, the room was forced to. It was a charity gala, one of those glittering political fundraisers with champagne towers, violin quartets, and carefully curated guest lists. The kind of event my parents had attended for decades, and this time I was the guest of honor. When I walked in, I wore a deep navy suit. Not flashy, not designer, just tailored enough to say, I know exactly who I am. Cameras flashed. People clapped. I smiled. shook hands, and gave short nods to donors I knew had never once voted for someone like me. And then I saw them. My mother first. Stiff smile, tight posture. Then Ryan, standing beside her, wearing a forced grin and eyes that didn't quite meet mine. But it was my father's face that stopped me cold. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't even pretending. He was just staring. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't disappointment. It was something he'd never shown me before. Respect. He didn't say anything, just nodded once. Slow, deliberate. The kind of nod men like him reserve for equals. For people who earned a seat at the table, not through blood or inheritance, but through fire. Governor Blackwell stepped forward and greeted me with a hearty handshake. "Senator Reynolds," he said proudly, "we need more voices like yours in this party." My mother flinched. Ryan looked away. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need their approval anymore. Not because it stopped mattering, but because I had something better. The respect of those who saw me for who I was, not for who I refused to pretend to be. That night, I gave a speech. I spoke about policy, about working families, about the power of showing up even when no one claps for you. And as I left the stage, I passed my father again. This time, he said it aloud, "You did it." Not with joy, not with warmth, but with truth. And for once, that was enough. It was just a bill, not sweeping reform, not a national headline, just a modest piece of legislation to expand after-school program funding in 3 pilot districts. Something small, manageable, easy to overlook. But for me, it was everything. I had fought for months, through budget hearings, backroom negotiations, political eye rolls, and amendments designed to water it down. I watched it get delayed, tabled, and nearly killed twice, but I kept showing up. I kept pushing, and one rainy Tuesday afternoon, it passed, 18-14. I sat there, stunned. My staff clapped quietly behind me. Reporters scribbled notes. No fireworks, no thunderous applause. But I knew what it meant. It meant kids, real kids, would have a safe place to go after school. It meant tired parents could work that extra shift without fear. It meant one less barrier between survival and opportunity in neighborhoods like the one I represented. When I walked out of the chamber, I called Ms. Denise, my mentor from all those years ago. She didn't say much. Just breathed into the phone for a long moment and whispered, "I'm proud of you, baby." That meant more than all the press in the world. That night, I visited one of the schools that would receive the new funding. It was still open, still lit, buzzing with the laughter of second graders playing kickball in the gym. A little girl ran up and said, "Are you the one who made the school stay open late?" My mom said you're like a boss lady. I knelt down, smiled, and said, "Yeah, something like that." In that moment, I didn't feel like a politician. I felt like I mattered. Not because I made history, but because I made something better. It was the annual Reynolds Foundation dinner. Black tie, valet parking, a string quartet playing Vivaldi in the foyer. The kind of event I hadn't been invited to in nearly a decade. This time, I was the keynote speaker. I stood backstage in a crimson dress, simple but strong, watching as names were announced. Donors, CEOs, university trustees, all receiving polite applause. Then I heard it. "Please welcome our honored guest, Senator Kennedy Reynolds." The applause was awkward at first, polite, a little surprised. And then it grew, stronger, real. I stepped onto that stage, the very one my father once stood on, when he was honored for lifetime service to business. I saw the crowd, a sea of people who once whispered about how I had lost my way. Now they stood to their feet. I took the mic, steady voice, steady heart. "I used to sit in the back of this room," I began. "Invisible, quiet, dismissed. Tonight, I speak from the front, not because I changed who I was, but because I refused to." I spoke not about politics, but about purpose, about why we need to stop measuring success by titles and start measuring it by impact, about what it means to fight for something and someone other than yourself. When I finished, there was silence. Then, a slow rise of applause. Not out of obligation, but respect. Afterward, my father approached. Slower than usual. Grayer than I remembered. He didn't speak right away. Then, with a voice low and honest, he said, "You proved me wrong. And I'm glad you did." That was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get. And it was enough. As I left that night, I didn't feel like the black sheep anymore. I felt like a Reynolds. But more importantly, I felt like me.